Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Injustice Podcast. I'm your host, David Greenwald. For the past 10 years, we've operated Vanguard court watches in California, including San Francisco, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. Our goal? Expose everyday court injustices, and now, more broadly, shine a spotlight on injustices in the entire criminal justice system, in the form of wrongful convictions, police and prosecutorial misconduct, and mass incarceration. This podcast hopes to take it a step further and highlight criminal justice reform on a national level.
Everyday injustice.
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Phil Melendez. He works with Smart Justice California, and next month he will be receiving one of our Vanguard Justice Awards in Sacramento. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
So, Phil, why don't you start by telling us a bit about your story and how you came to be incarcerated, at the age of 19?
Yes, 19. So my story is very similar to a lot of folks from my community. We grew up with a lot of adversities, a lot of trauma that we've seen and incurred by the hands of our families. That was the case for me. I had a lot of neglect. I had a lot of issues with having or not having self-esteem and not feeling like I had a home or a belonging. My mom, unfortunately, informed me of my dad. I had a stepdad and, was part of that family. And it was known that my stepdad was not my dad. And so when I got to asking questions about, where's my dad and, what's going on, my mom, unfortunately, and probably due to her youthful age in which she had me, it was just, he didn't want you. What do you care about him? He doesn't want you. And, that specific thing, it was like this snowball effect. Well, like, wow, I look at Urkel show, Family Matters, the one with Kirk Cameron and was it Family Ties, or I forget, but I saw a lot of those nuclear families where it was a mom, dad, kids, and everyone had a place. And I noticed very early on that I did not fit that mold, and for me that left me with a chip on my shoulder with little issues, and it showed up in the way that I interacted at school. I, for the most part, was a good student. Some would say a nerd in some cases. Some people would not. But I did good. I had good grades. And then, I started noticing these family dynamics and learning more about my dad and his negative roles that he played in the community, from drug dealing to committing acts of violence. And that informed me that I needed to, in my, youthful 7, 8, 9-year-old brain, it told me that I needed to do negative things to be like him, so that I could hopefully one day earn his respect, love, and just have my dad like I saw the rest of the community having. And so I started out doing little things where maybe I remember specifically I stole a pencil from a kid's desk, and while he was sleeping, and all the other kids behind me saw it and laughed when he woke up and couldn't find his pencil. And for me, that was like an eye-opening experience, that I can get some positive affirmation so that I can have some acceptance from doing something negative. And that unfortunately progressed. I got into some fights, and I saw that after I won my first one, that brought a lot more respect and a lot more acceptance, and it just kept going and it kept going, and I craved constantly that affirmation, and I kept getting it through negative acts, whether it was even just acting up as a class clown, those laughs that I got at the teacher's expense or at the lesson's expense. Those are the things that made me feel validated. Unfortunately, as I grew, it became more than fights. It became actual, not just one-on-one fights, assaults. And then from there, drug dealing. I saw a lot of folks in the community who had nice things and were accepted for, having those things. And I said, okay, well, that's another thing I need to aspire to. And it was all kind of in keeping and in line with this idea of who my dad was and what I needed to do to still get that acceptance from him. And unfortunately, with that comes a subscription to a lifestyle that is, definitely criminalized. And, sometimes, the lifestyle is born out of necessity, whether it's acceptance or just monetary security. But unfortunately, I dove deep into those things and started selling drugs and adopting the idea that if anybody messed with me, I have to hurt them and hurt them way worse than I've been hurt or wronged, to just assert my dominance. That was like a horrible, toxically masculine or toxic masculine type of view of the world that I had. And I bought into it wholeheartedly. And unfortunately, my dad was stabbed while collecting a drug debt. And I had already started to rekindle a relationship with him, and he was kind of there, but I just didn't know where we stood. And around this time when we were getting to know each other, he was stabbed. And unfortunately, everyone in the neighborhood was asking, what are you going to do? And everybody knew, news travels fast, especially when it's something like that. And everyone was looking at me to do something. And I felt a deep pressure to solidify my place as his son, but also just maintain that identity that I had made for myself, that mask that I put on as, as a gangster or someone who, is respected in the neighborhood for negative things. And that night I found out where people lived in the area, or at least in the area where it happened, and who might have been involved. And unfortunately, that night I took 2 lives and assaulted another person and was sentenced, and for those crimes I was facing the death penalty. And then based on the convictions, which were second-degree murders, it left me ineligible for the death penalty or for the life without the possibility of parole sentence. I was sentenced to 30 to life plus 11. And based on juvenile justice legislation that was passed in 2014, I was allowed the opportunity to go to the parole board 15 years earlier and have special considerations for parole based on the hallmarks of youth, which, are also based on neuroscience, which says that, kids' brains aren't fully developed until the age of 25. In some cases 27. And there's that. And then it also says that also with that underdeveloped brain, that it's harder to escape the circumstances of your environment, like your parents and your living conditions, and they're heavily influential. And then also too, there's the inability to look at long-term consequences, and that's what the bill was based on, was that neuroscience and the fact that, well, as kids are I don't know if you have kids, but I do, and it takes a lot of a lot of talking to get any simple point across.
But I'm wondering, Phil, because you kind of skipped ahead to how you got out, but I'm curious as to what kind of your mindset was when you got in there, and also what kind of turned it around for you.
Yeah, no. So I went in with a horrible mindset, with that same mentality that I needed to dominate and assert myself. My dad himself, he stabbed people in prison, and he also has been stabbed in prison. So that also informed my view of going in. And I went in with the life sentence, which also was something to contend with. Back then, lifers weren't coming home. I think it was either Pete Wilson or Ray Davis that said only way a lifer is coming home is in a pine box. And so that was also true, very true. There were not a lot of parole grants, and if there were, they were definitely reversed. Just until 2009 is when things finally started changing for lifers. But at the point I went in, it was like, that's it, I'm done. So I have this whole hopelessness on one end, but then also on the other end, there's the issues that I brought into prison with me that led me to commit harm in my community. And yeah, just the idea of prison. Like, it's sad that, growing up with my friends and the gang and my dad, his dad's influence is like a rite of passage. And so on one hand, I figured I was going to go to prison eventually one day, just didn't know for how long, for how serious of a crime. But yeah, those things heavily weighed on me as I went in. I looked for, gang acceptance. I committed violence on other incarcerated folks because I was heavily participating in the prison politics and that whole lifestyle. It's a different world in there, especially for a youngster just starting out. You're looked at as someone who needs to prove themselves, and I was a person who always needed to prove themselves in general. And so it was like a perfect fit in a very, very negative and harmful way for myself and for the people that I assaulted. And that persisted, sadly. I fell into my old ways where, I was drinking and smoking weed inside. I was, just stayed playing those prison politics for a long time. And a lot of it too, another aspect of it too, was also because of self-preservation. I did figure out very early on that if I did assault people, I would then have shown to prove myself, and also shown not only to prove myself, but also show that I can navigate this space. And so it put me in a position where I didn't have to commit acts of violence. When things happened, I kind of elevated myself to a point where, like, I can assess the situation and talk to other leaders, in the prison yard, and either come to peaceful talks or agreements, or sanction violence against somebody who was deemed according to this, warped relief system, if they were deemed to be in violation of the prison politics and the rules in which we governed ourselves. And so this persisted until, let's see, honestly, all the way until San Quentin. I know that's like a place of rehabilitation, or so it's looked at as, as one of the flagships for rehabilitation, at least within the state. And I was not ready for it. I came to that place in with all of my issues, my trauma, nothing worked on, 15 years of institutionalization, and I actually rejected the culture. People asked me if I had participated in groups and programs, and I was like, what does that even mean? We had an AA at one prison that I was at, and that was about it, and nobody really took it seriously. And so this whole culture of healing was so foreign to me that, yeah, again, I rejected it, did what I always did, which was just work out and play ball on the yard and just do my time, basically. And I think eventually I said, you know what, one of these days, I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but I am going to go to the parole board. I didn't know if I was going to live that long or not. And then I didn't really have much faith in the system for really considering me for parole in the first place. But I said, in the off chance, I will take this group and I will take a program and I will see what it's about and see what these people are talking about. And at the very first group that I went to, I heard people speaking accountably about the harm that they've committed in the community. And, that was such a shift in it was a paradigm shift, because throughout my whole incarceration, I had, people supporting the negativity, giving me kudos, taps on the back, your dad got stabbed, you did what you're supposed to do, and it's a very, very horrible oversimplification, but, that's the toxic environment that I was in. And so that's what reinforced me. And so to hear these people speaking about their harm, what they've done, getting emotional about it, owning it, I was like, whoa, this is a shock. I don't know how much of this I can take. I don't even really look at my stuff. I really, honestly, for those first 15 years, just kind of stepped everything down and focused on survival. And then anytime any thoughts came into my head about, the harm I've caused, about what led me to it, I stuffed it down, because, it's painful. And to see this happening, it piqued my interest. But I can't say that it was an overnight thing that I was like, oh, Like you're talking accountably. I'm in it. You know, it was like it's like this whole whoa, let me assess the situation. Let me look deeper into this before I can like really commit. And then the one thing that I can say that I was still making sure that I had a quote unquote paper trail of taking groups and programs in the event that I did go to the parole board. And fortunately that paid off. I kept progressing in groups. You know, this first one was very I don't want to say superficial. It didn't have as much depth and meat to it, and as much. It didn't have as much trauma informed curriculum in it than some of the other ones that I took. And fortunately, I stayed the course and ended up in a group where a woman had told her story about losing her mom to gun violence, and she had all of us in the group crying. It was for a lot of us, it was the first time that we've really been faced with the realities and the pain that we've caused in the community. I was crying. I mean, I don't remember there being a dry eye in the room. But that day was a day that I really committed wholeheartedly to myself to do better. And I looked at her and I apologized to her. I've seen her. Well, I haven't seen her, but I connected with her on online social media, and I told her, I said, hey, you know what, you really changed my life. Helped me bring me home, but also really changed the trajectory of my healing, that whole process. And from then on, I was committed. I took even more groups that dealt with the victim's impact. And those things, again, super painful to talk about, the trauma that led me to internalize my unworthiness and unlovable status. All those things were difficult because I mean there's more than just my dad not wanting me at first. There's a lot more there, and I unpacked it all in these groups. And sadly, it took almost 20 years for me to like really get to my issues. I wish it could have been sooner. Probably would have had a better and less violent time in prison. But
19 when you went in. How old were you when you got out?
Oh, I was 37 or 38. So I did like 20 years. So yeah, 38, 39. And but based on everything that I unpacked, all the trauma that I unpacked, all the deep looks into the harm that I've caused, and those looks were deep. It's not just like saying, hey, I did this and it hurt somebody. It's also like putting myself in their shoes. It's me writing letters to the people who are not even alive anymore, but just to say something, to put a feeling from me to them, even if they can't hear it, but just for me to really dig deep into that. It took me looking into people that I've lost and connecting that pain to theirs. And then looking at things like the ripple effects, the impacts on the whole community, like not just the direct families, but the first responders, the judge, the jury, the people in my neighborhood who, the negative impact and the negative role models that I became. I looked into all of those things and had just deep, sincere remorse about it. And I was able to take all of that to the parole board and be found suitable at my initial hearing. And that was in 2017 and was released in September, actually. Yeah, it'll be 6 years, the 28th of this month.
Wow. So what's it like to be out? I mean, you've been in since basically you're a kid. Now you're approaching 40. You finally get out. What was that like? And it seems like you had some resources to fall back on though.
I did. I always state that I benefited heavily from the San Quentin privilege, which the San Quentin privilege is something that is sadly not felt in very rural and remote prisons. Fortunately, San Quentin is situated in the Bay Area. There's a lot of folks who run these programs that become a safety network when you come home, and you form real good bonds with people, and they're helpful when you come home. And for me to come home, from being a teenager to, like you said, almost 40, it's just, it's like being in a time capsule, I would say. Um, prison does preserve you in its own way, sometimes physically, but definitely mentally, I did feel somewhat like my growth was stunted. And it could just be from having the same day over and over, living out the same day or same week for 20 years. And then you come home and everyone has phones, and they don't even look up anymore, and people they're driving on while they're looking at their phones, and that really used to scare me. But also too, just looking at this whole world and trying to navigate it in its entirety, because you don't just come home wanting to start a whole your life over. You also come home. Oh, for me, I came home with a deep desire to make amends, and where those amends were not possible, then to make at least a living amends, because of the harm that I've caused. And so I have to I'm not just building their life, I'm tackling the whole issues of all the ails of the world, at least trying to, by preaching emotional intelligence and teaching folks everything that I've learned, in the hopes to stop people from following in my footsteps. So that's like this whole burden that I placed on myself, but it's something that was also very near and dear to me. So it felt, I don't know, what was the guy with the ball in his shoulder, Atlas? Like I'm trying to take on all the sadness of the world and trying to do what I can to teach folks what I've learned, and because on one hand it is painful to work through all the trauma, but on the other hand, when you come out of that and you really know what makes you tick, you really know what your triggers are, and you know why they're triggers in the first place, it makes it really, really easy to find happiness. And also too, just based on the 20 years I was gone, I had a lot of gratitude. So there's a lot of happiness there, but at the same time, there's a deep desire and the whole weight of the world that I took on just based on my remorse and what I wanted to do. It was this duality of extreme happiness and extreme like trepidation on how to navigate it, not wanting to mess anything up, because I don't know, I just want so much better for the world. And yeah, it put a lot of burden, put a heavy burden. And then to go from a very strict and regimented lifestyle just to have like the world expand before you, it's like, where do I start? And so it's very daunting, but I took it on wholeheartedly. But even to this day, I still get sad about us not making as much progress. I want to see a lot more in terms of emotional intelligence for the whole world, basically. I want everyone to, I don't want to say go to prison and then take all these programs. I want everyone to have that same learning, that trauma-informed care that I have to stop everything that's ailing the world, because it's really sad. Like I'm very empathic, and I hate to see people argue. I connect with it, and I get scared, I get angry, I get sad really, really easy right along with people. And so just to see like all the divides in society these days, I feel like it all could just be quelled or quashed with just an emotional intelligence and a little bit of compassion for everyone in the world. But yeah, it's still sad to see that we're not there yet, and getting worse.
And really, this is half your story, because then you get out and you've done a lot since you've been out. So how'd you hook up with some of the groups that you've worked for, and tell us a little bit about your work with Smart Justice?
Yeah, so the first organization I worked for, I gave a speech, a fundraiser on the very first day that I came home, and from that speech, there was a family that was inspired to give to and create a fellowship for me, and on providing reentry services for folks coming home. And so basically, I was just helping people navigate reentry, much like I was helped as I had came home, whether it's, learning how to use public transportation, debit cards, pump gas. That was also like, I remember when I first came home, my friend was driving me around. He's like, I'm gonna get some gas. I was like, can I watch? He was like, what? I guess. And I was like, cool. And then I was like, yeah, he put the debit card in, picked the thing. He said, make sure you don't ask for a receipt because you don't want to have people having your. I was like, okay. There's a whole lot that I had to get some help with, and still to this day need some help with some things. But that was my first job, and it was great and very fulfilling. And then after that, I was asked by some friends who we used to work together at San Quentin to put on events and bring the community inside. And they said, we're starting a new org. We're going to be doing the same thing we were doing. I was like, let's do that. That's fun. My fellowship was ending. It's perfect timing. And then unfortunately during the pandemic, that second organization, we lost funding. And then sure enough, right after that, Smart Justice said, hey, we're going to do this Get Proximate program. We're going to bring folks inside the prisons. I was like, I can definitely do that. And, that work has been very fulfilling along the way, though. Like while inside, some of the events that I put together were to actually pass legislation that brought me home. We had an event inside San Quentin around Senate Bill 261, which is the bill that I had mentioned earlier, the juvenile justice legislation. And from there, I got a hankering for like advocacy. And as soon as I came home, even during my fellowship, my friend was asking me, do you want to help, push SB 1437, which, amended the felony murder rule and got rid of the natural and probable consequences doctrine. And I was like really, really enthused for that. I mean, I knew it was bringing home good friends, but also too, it's just, it was a continuance of what I feel like I had started inside. And so now with Smart Justice, I am putting on the prison visits, same as I used to inside. I'm taking in legislators. We brought in like over 50% of the state legislature by now. We've brought in district attorneys, cultural influencers, all inside to get proximate with the issues of incarceration and to meet old friends of mine and people who are very much like me and of a like mind as far as their growth and healing process. And so that's been very fulfilling. And then at Smart Justice too, I've also recently been doing that, but also tackling more legislation and helping out in coalition work there. So that's been fun to, start dropping into district offices, meeting up with members or staffers, telling my story and telling them why these bills make sense and why we can, let these folks out safely with no impact to public safety, or actually with as assets to public safety as a lot of us are when we come home. And so it's been very, very fulfilling to do all of that work since I've been home, bringing folks inside, but also bringing folks home as well. So a little inside and out.
Tell us a little bit about these prison visits. I know somebody who was on the inside of the one you guys did in the spring, I guess, at Donovan.
Oh yeah, no, that one was big. That was our policymaker retreat, where we brought in, I think it was around 50 members of the legislature. I think it was about 80 people total that we brought in. And yeah, so basically I go in, I tell the folks inside, hey, this is what we're doing. Actually, I introduce myself. I say, hey, I was from a lifer. I did all this X, Y, and Z when I was inside, from the growth and healing to the events linking the community members to us. And this is more of the same. And, I give them the opportunity, like, you can totally opt out. I know it's pretty high stakes. You want to make sure you put the best foot forward. And if you feel like you're not ready, then totally understand. We can always find people who are willing to talk about their growth and healing inside, because there's so many of us. I always like to say I don't know who made this term up, but I love the term, which was, I am not an exception. I'm the reflection of who's inside. And so it's been great getting folks inside to see those same people that are, like I said, of the same mind as me, or even of a better mind with their growth and healing. Yeah, that particular visit was ridiculous. It was a mega lift. I mean, shout out to our whole team. It wasn't, for the most part, I run all these visits by myself, but this one, it was all hands on deck. Our team was super involved in making sure all the details. My team was very, very involved in this one specifically, and made it the success that it was. But yeah, I went in, told the folks we're having this. They were up for it. They even had suggestions of, here's some topics, some content, here's some real ideas. I was like, let's bring it all to the table. And because, they always say that people closest to the problem are the ones with the best solutions. And that's what our proximity work is based on. I think it's the Brian Stevenson quote. And always happy to link those folks together, because there's definitely stories that need to be told. There's understanding that needs to be had. For the legislators, it's putting a face to the legislation that crosses their desks. For the folks inside, it's empowering. We also have survivors come and, tell their stories. And much like I was impacted by that lady that I mentioned, they are also impacted. And so it goes a long way for growth and healing for the folks inside, but it's also empowering and gives them their voice back. And I mean, that's something that I had mentioned with one of the volunteers at San Quentin. After I was found suitable for parole, I remember telling her, thank you so much for helping me. She actually pushed me to participate in my first event. And I just told her, thank you for giving me my voice back and for making me feel like heard and seen and valued. It's all of the things that I was missing as a child. And I'm always happy to give that back to the folks inside.
So as we wrap up, what would you say the biggest thing that stands out in the 6 years that you've been out?
The biggest thing that stands out as far as my work?
Yeah.
Ooh. I would say that event was huge. We had, because it wasn't just legislators, there were labor leaders, there were so many people, so many influential people at that event that, it was impossible not to come away inspired, and it was impossible not to come away with a desire to do better by incarcerated folks. It really humanized them for those that hadn't really thought of them in that way. It addressed the elephant in the room, which is extreme violence in the communities. It did a lot, and I think that was one of the things that it pushed the needle really, really far. When it comes to legislation, working on those things too. That's also been very fulfilling for me to go up to the Capitol and sit in a public safety hearing with committee members and saying, hey, here's a good bill, pass it, and urge them to vote aye. And it's surreal sometimes. Those two things: working on bills, working on legislation, and that specific visit. All of them really, but that one, just for the sheer number of people that we brought in, it was huge, and it was a major accomplishment, not just for me, but for our team, and also I think for criminal justice reform in general.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. I look forward to seeing you a little over a month from now, when we honor you for all the great work that you've done, and also for turning your life around, which is probably the most amazing accomplishment of it all. We've been talking with Phil Melendez from Smart Justice, California. I'm David Greenwald. You've been listening to Everyday Injustice. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's Justice for George Powell, all one word, .com.